You are listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast, where we look to educate and entertain the endurance racing community through discussions with racing professionals and elite age groupers.
In today's episode, I speak with pro triathlete Kevin Collington. We talk about his 2017 race season, and he shares a lot of interesting and useful training tips. I hope you enjoy. Kevin, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Adam. Doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so why don't we start off with just learning a little bit about your background. From my understanding, you come from a swim background and started triathlons in college in 2004. Can you just kind of talk through a little bit of how you got introduced to the sport and then ultimately turned professional?
Yeah, that's true. I do have a swim background. I started swimming when I was 4. Basically, my brother, who's 2 years older than me, started swimming when he was 6. And then the coach was like, well, what's the point of bringing him, being me, to swim practice and having him stand on the pool deck? So they just threw me in 2 years earlier.
Lucky you.
Yeah. And I swam through high school, and then this is in Orlando, Florida. And then I went to the University of Florida, and it was the Ryan Lochte era back then at UF. And I didn't even try out for the team, although I would have been maybe a walk-on, like not quite good enough for the team, but might have been able to sneak my way on, but definitely those guys were way faster than me. So instead I just joined the triathlon club, and I made a bunch of friends, and it was a lot of fun. And that's kind of where I got started in triathlon. I started training with a guy who was training for the Olympic trials for the steeplechase. So that's sort of where I started running and learning how to run. And then I got halfway decent at the sport and won the collegiate national championship in 2007. And that's kind of when I really decided to race professionally.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's great that you kind of found the sport in college and were able to use, obviously, your swim background, but then excel in triathlon. So, I mean, obviously, since 2004, I mean, it's been 13 plus years. The sport has changed and grown a lot. I mean, kind of, how has the progression kind of gone for you? I mean, how have things changed since you started versus now? I mean, a lot more equipment, a lot more technology, but just kind of talk through from your kind of point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it has really changed a lot. And it's not just the equipment, but also the level of athlete, and then the quality of fields. So I started in the collegiate ranks, and even now you can see that collegiately it's progressed to, there's a draft legal collegiate national championships, there's NCAA women's sport. So that's new since I graduated. And then I got into ITU after I graduated from University of Florida in 2008. And that was a very high level of racing then. And I think we're just kind of getting to the point now in the 70.3 ranks where the world championship this past weekend in Chattanooga was basically a WTS race. It was such a deep field. The professionalism of how the races run. We had a pontoon dive start. We had call outs down to the pontoon. And then, just the way that the strategy plays out in the race, there's so many guys, back in 2009, for instance, my first world championship, 70.3, it was much different. It was a big field, but a lot of the guys just, I guess, weren't great at 70.3, but now there's 30 guys in a field of 40 who are world class. So
right.
That's been a big change in the sport. And I think one of the times that the sport changed was when Sebastian Kienle attacked off the front of the group in Las Vegas. I think that was 2013 or 2012. But that was a big turning point in the sport, because that was hey, guys, we need to be able to ride our bikes hard and run well off of a very hard bike. And that's where 70.3 has progressed in the past 5-6 years, from being sort of a swim, pack ride on the bike, and then a fast run, to being all three sports. Just you can't have a weakness. And it's definitely evolved as a sport over these past 13 years.
Exactly. And I hear a lot from other triathletes who don't have swim backgrounds that, the swim, it absolutely, you have to be strong enough to stay in that either first or second pack, or you get left behind, and it's just getting that competitive, and you can't have a weakness now. Yeah,
that's true. And I've sort of had both sides of the coin this year. I had a little accident at a race in July, and so I wasn't able to swim for 4 weeks. So these past 2 races that I've done, which was the Des Moines Escape Triathlon and then 70.3 Worlds, I've been way off the back of the swim group, and it's just a whole different world back there. you have no idea what place you're in. Like nobody's really giving you information out on course. They're just like, oh, here's a guy in 26th place. He doesn't need a time split. So it's been an interesting, like eye-opening experience to not be in that front swim pack.
Yeah.
It's like pretty negative experience that I'm hoping to end pretty soon.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, why don't we talk about 2017 then? I mean, you've had some highs and some lows, and I guess in a typical season, that's going to happen. So, from looking back at your season this year, I was actually racing at St. George as well. You did it kind of a tactical drop out there saying, this isn't going, it's not my day, but I want to save myself for my next race, which was Monterey, and you go and win it. So I guess tactically that was a really smart move to do. And can you talk a little bit about those races, St. George, kind of how it unfolded, what your thought process there to tactically say, I'm going to pull the plug and then go into Monterey and obviously crush it and win. So
yeah, that St. George was it's a course I love. It's so hilly and mountainous, and then the run also hilly. It's a great course for me. So it was really hard for me to pull the plug on that race. But I knew, that course can also tear you up with the 3 miles downhill finishing the run.
Oh yeah.
It's just your calves can be sore for literally a week. So I got out there and I wasn't in the position I wanted to be in. I would say I was looking at like an 8th place finish as my best possible day. And, Monterey was 1 week later, or 8 days later, actually. So it was another regional championship. And I just kind of made the decision to just do a 5 mile run off the bike. I kind of was on course for a mile, and then I made a left turn off course and then ran back to the transition area. But that was a tough decision to make because it's not really in the spirit, I think, of racing. It's like, you're supposed to go out there for the challenge and finish no matter what. And but for me professionally, I was like, I need to do well at Monterey next weekend, or at least give myself a chance. And globally from Purple Patch, my coach Matt, me and Sam Appo both were just completely flat. Like Sam got 9th that day, and he's a guy who wins almost every race he enters. And we both came back the next weekend. Sam won Santa Rosa, and I won Monterey. So overall, I think we just did something wrong with the taper. I think we overcooked it coming into the St. George race. And then we both got a few days off and then ramped back into our race the next weekend. And we both kind of executed and won the race. So it was a best case scenario from a standpoint of having a bad race to start out with.
Right. And speaking of, I guess, taper or, a week back to, races back to back, I mean, how did that week look like in between? So you finish St. George, you have to stay somewhat active. You're already tapered for St. George, but you have another race the next weekend. I mean, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it was different for Sam and I, because Sam actually finished the race in St. George. He got 9th. I just did that 5 mile run off the bike. So the next day I went out and did a 75-minute kind of longer run in St. George. And Sam, on the other hand, was pure rest. So I think overall we had this little taper into St. George that wasn't quite enough to freshen us up. And then, Sam used his next 7 days. I used my next 8 days to really just rest. After my Sunday training in St. George, I was really all rest as well. And I flew down to Monterey on a Thursday, and I think I rode my bike for 7 minutes when I got there. And that was my only workout upon arrival. And then I just kind of did another day of easy workouts the next day. And it was really just adding that rest to the legs that we'd been training since basically January 1st, quite hard. So it was, I think there was a lot of fatigue buildup leading into St. George that we didn't know was there.
Right.
And ultimately it was just shedding that fatigue during that next week that allowed us to win those races.
Interesting. And so in Monterey, I mean, I'm not familiar with the course. It's obviously probably different than St. George. I mean, but can you just explain kind of what the course is like? And then, you obviously won it. So it was a great day. I mean, how did it unfold for you and obviously get first?
Yeah, Monterey's an awesome course, actually. So they have this river. It's a man-made river that runs through the center of town. And it's basically a pool swim. So it's like 4 feet deep, chlorinated, perfectly clear water. And it winds through the city for about 2,500 meters in length.
Wow.
And so they start us like 600 meters in. We swim 1,900 meters down. Well, there's no current, but we swim down the river to T1. It was non-wetsuit this year. And then the bike course actually isn't great for me. I thought my biggest threat was going to be Andrew Starkowitz, because he has this way of like getting 7 or 8 minutes on really flat bike courses and then he's basically a mile ahead once the run starts.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to catch him. So things really went well for me when out of T1, I dropped Mau Mendez on the bike. He's a little runner from Mexico. And then we didn't see Starkey until maybe 20 miles in, which is just the perfect scenario because now he only has 36 miles to get a gap. And then it became clear he wasn't really riding to his potential because we were able to kind of ride with him. I mean, this is the 12-meter draft rule. But so Starkey didn't get away until probably the halfway point of the bike. And with only 40 Ks to get a gap, he only had 2 minutes on us starting the run. And it was me, Tyler Butterfield, and Sylvain Soudry from France.
Yeah.
And just took out the run really hard, and nobody came with me. And next thing I know, I was winning the race. And even I was surprised. I was like, I was surprised I was in first. I caught Starkey at mile 2. So I guess I was making up a minute per mile on him. Not his day, clearly. But yeah, I just kind of held the gap, and Tyler made a little run back into my lead in the last couple miles of the run, but I never even knew it until I saw him finish only like 25 seconds back from me.
And, from a racing perspective, what would be your preference to be in the lead early? I guess you said mile 2 and be the hunted, or be the hunter and kind of be able to know where the first person is and be able to tactically kind of figure out when to race. I would imagine being in the lead early has got to be tough mentally.
Yeah, it actually was because I was like, because I'd really taken it out hard, but that has been kind of the key to my winning races this year. I also won Costa Rica in June, and both races I just took the run out really hard, got a gap from the beginning, and then I kind of throttled it back maybe around 10 Ks into the run, so halfway in. But yeah, I guess I just have to be confident in my running. It's one of my strengths, so going out from the gun and just I don't want to sit around tactically and give someone a chance to maybe warm their legs up and get their rhythm into the run when I can just get a 90-second lead, which is what I had on Tyler at about 8 miles. And then, I mean, I think Tyler had basically given me the race mentally at that point. So even though he was making up time, I don't think he ever had any thought of winning. He was just, at that point, I think he said he was doing a workout for Ironman Texas.
Right.
Yeah. Or wait, I guess it was a different Ironman Boulder.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah. It's good mentally to get out and get that huge gap because people just they're like, oh, I guess I'm going to get second.
Right. And so you mentioned, and I want to kind of go back to your background for a second, because you mentioned running is one of your strengths now. And I often hear that, swimmers, they have that, obviously you have the work ethic and the fitness, but that the pounding of running is much different and takes time. And so, when you transition to going from that swim background into, running, you worked out with a steeplechaser, that helps. Those are some of the toughest guys out there. But, how was that transition for you in terms of, being able to, and now it sounds like you're a great runner, but, that had to be difficult at the beginning, I would suppose.
Yeah. I mean, swimmers, we have a huge engine, but we have no ability to withstand running injuries. It's just, I've seen so many swimmers come into the sport and then the next thing they have a stress fracture or a stress reaction or something. So I was in the same boat. I started working with Bobby McGee, who's a running coach. He works with USA Triathlon, and he took a picture of me in 2007. And you can just see my hips dropping and my ankles are turning in, and I look horrible basically. And there's a picture of me from the World Championship last weekend, and I looked at it and I was like, it was almost the exact same angle, except there was no basically I just looked like a runner now. So it was all about strengthening up those weaknesses that you have as a swimmer. I was a breaststroker, so I had a lot of upper body muscle, and I had a lot of weaknesses in my lower body. And it was just running and running and running. I guess it's been 15 years now of running, and year over year, you just gain more strength and lower your injury risk. I think I'm 25 pounds lighter than I was as a swimmer, so that's a big help.
Did you do much actual strength training and doing sort of building up those weakness areas early on, or was it just sort of the running over time that did it?
It was a combination of 3 things. I think it was with Bobby, it was a lot of running drills. It was a lot of learning to run correctly. And then also time in the weight room, just not even heavy weights, just body weight type stuff or very low weight, basically lunges and box jumps and landing on one foot, single leg sort of weights and strength training. And then also the running, obviously running helps. And I was able to handle like 20 miles a week, and then the next year 30, and then the next year 40. And now I'm up to like, some of my biggest weeks of training are 80, 85 miles a week. This is in the winter.
Wow.
But like, yeah, I've really like, given my low weight and my like what turns out to be a decently strong body that, I don't get injured too easily. I can handle quite a lot of running.
That's awesome.
And
Yeah, that's
swimmer,
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, as a swimmer, I remember we would do like these runs, and like a 1 or 2 mile run in high school, and I'd have shin splints and I wouldn't be walking the next day. It was pretty bad. So it's an evolution for sure.
Right. And so back to 2017, you mentioned before that, you're coming off of a crash. So we talked about the high. Now we'll talk, briefly about the low, but you were in Challenge Iceland. I believe you won it in 2016. You come back in 2017, probably high hopes and expectations. And then you had a crash on your bike. Can you just talk a little bit about what happened that day?
Yeah, Iceland, it's such an awesome race, but it's a huge like roll of the dice in terms of weather. It's the highest, the most northern latitude race, I think, in the world. And so, I mean, being up there in Iceland, you could have a perfect day, sunny and 80 degrees, or it could be, the year I won it was 55 and raining. And then this year, even though all week it said it was going to be a perfect day, we show up at the race day and there's 30 to 40 mile an hour sustained winds.
Oh, wow.
I was like, okay, if they're going to have us race, then I'm going to do it. Like, I'm certainly not going to just go home. But I only had one wheel choice. I only had my disc and my front C75. And given my weight, which is 140 at the time, like I'm not a very big guy, I think I just got hit with a 50 mile an hour gust probably. Like I felt it. It just blew me off the road. Like it picked me up and it blew me into the shoulder. And so I'm riding along the shoulder and I'm trying to save it. But eventually I just endoed over the bike and fell on my shoulder. So overall, like the injuries were fairly low. I didn't have any road rash. I just had I think my shoulder just took the brunt of the fall. And I had minor tears in my supraspinatus and infraspinatus, so a couple of shoulder muscles. And a nice Icelandic person picked me up off the side of the road and brought me back to transition. And yeah, I just got looked at by medical, but I couldn't swim for about 4 weeks after that, which wasn't great for my world's lead up. That's pretty much long and short of it.
Right. And is that the longest period you've gone without swimming in your career?
Yeah, for the longest time. I mean, when I take 2 weeks off or 3 weeks off at the end of the year, like the swimming is the thing that I take off the most. I mean, I've swam so much in my life, and it's the most boring, I think, of the three sports. You're just staring at the black line, and I've done it for like 30 years now. So I'll take a couple weeks off in the winter, but you have so much time to get back into shape before your first race of the season. So having to take 4 weeks off in August was, I was hopeful that I wouldn't lose too much, but I lost kind of just enough to be in no man's land, basically in the swim in Chattanooga this past week. And I was about 90 seconds off the main group, 2.5 minutes off Canute. So that was a new experience for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a totally different race in that situation, especially for someone like you who's always been, at the front with the swimming. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that sense, I think I did about as well as I could. I rode up into what ended up being like a chase group because there was a climb at the beginning of the ride. So me and Drew Scott, who is also a Purple Patch guy, we kind of just like mopped up a bunch of people up the climb, which was a good way to sort of get ourselves back into the race. But yeah, there was just this big group of 10 off basically the main chase group chasing Ben. And that was the whole race. I think only one person from our group ran into the top 10, and everybody else was sort of fighting for those 11 through 20 spots, which there's not much that goes with those spots except the glory of racing a world championship. There's no podium ceremony. There's no prize money. So
yeah,
that's just how it is at world champs.
Yeah, and so you mentioned Purple Patch and your coach Matt Dixon before. Just talk about that a little bit. I mean, how did you get hooked in with those guys, and your thought process around picking a coach and why Purple Patch works for you?
Yeah, I started working with Matt in late 2014. So this is like my third year with Matt, and I was looking at basically a long course coach, so someone who's had success at the half Ironman and Ironman, and specifically with men. So Matt at the time had brought Tim Reed from kind of like not really even a relevant athlete to top 10 in the world. I think Tim was running, these 111s, 112s off the bike. And he also works with Jesse Thomas. So I knew that Matt specifically had success with long course male pros. And I met him. His coaching philosophy sort of meshed with what I wanted to do. And so, yeah, it was a good match. And I came off of 2014 World Championships 70.3. That was in Mont-Tremblant. And I had the swim, I had the run, but my cycling was just, I made it through about 60 Ks in the main group of the race and then got dropped. And so I was clearly weak on the bike, and Matt's great with bringing athletes up to basically par and better on the bike. And that's what we've been working on for the past 3 years. So in that sense, this race this past weekend in Chattanooga was really a validation of everything I've been doing, because I took a poor swim and then I rode my bike back into the race, which would have been absolutely unheard of from me back in 2014. I was just like a hanger on the bike, or even worse, dropped. So now the fact that I can have confidence in my cycling and move myself back into the race, even though it wasn't quite enough to get back into the relevant positions in the finish, that's been a big evolution of training and development as an athlete.
Right. And so, I mean, what was the approach to get you to become a stronger biker? I mean, what was it, more interval training? Like, just talk through sort of, what did Matt bring to the table that you weren't doing prior to 2014 that's now ramped you up to being, in this new level of cycling?
Well, we definitely dialed up the cycling training overall. There was a lot of focus on being able to handle any race situation that's thrown at you. So, they really search out hard courses for world championships these days, and it's not just Clearwater anymore. So we wanted to be able to handle high cadence situations, extreme low cadence situations, climbs, and flats and descents and everything. So it was a lot about teaching me how to correctly ride a bike, and that was both Matt and our assistant coach Paul Buick from New Zealand. We have camps a couple times a year, and they're always getting on me about like proper contact points on the bike and proper hand position, proper body position, and like when to power over a hill and when to not power over a hill or stay in the TT position. So it's just repetition of that sort of thing, the learning aspect, and then also obviously, building a lot of strength training into the cycling. So low cadence, like high power workouts. And then overall we dialed up the number of hours I was training. So I'll head out for like 4 or 5 hour rides every once in a while. And then, instead of doing 9-10 hours a week, I was doing 14, 15 hours. Some Ironman blocks, 19-20 hours of cycling per week. And it's not just the volume, but also the specificity throughout the week of what we're doing. And that's sort of brought my cycling up to passable in the professional ranks these days. And we're also hoping to move it into a strength over the next few years, like something that I can count on as a weapon, rather than just like, oh, I'm good enough to be here and not get dropped. We want to be good enough to drop other people. So right. That's the step.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned like the cycling skills and being able to do kind of, properly ride a bike. And that's actually, most people kind of discount that and don't think about that in the amateur ranks mainly. But like there's that set of skills that you need, and you need that toolkit on the bike course to be able to, take on the various conditions and be successful. And I think it's not just about cranking power, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned toolkit, and that's something Matt always is talking about. It's like, what is your toolkit to win a race? And ultimately, you just want to have as many tools in your your ability to use as you can. So not only like any course condition that's thrown at you. Clearly, I have trouble with 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts still, but other than that, it's like being able to be hard to race. It's like if someone can't drop you on the swim and can't drop you on the bike, and then can't outrun you, it's like you're very hard to race in that sense. There's nothing anyone can do about it. Like in terms of having no weaknesses. And so that's the ultimate goal kind of the Purple Patch program with me, and then also other athletes like Apo and Drew, and I think Jesse, and I don't think Tim's officially working with Matt anymore, but still a mentor. So yeah.
Right. And in terms of running off the bike, so now, you're really focusing on that bike and getting strong there. You obviously you said you were a strong runner, but is there anything specific that you do to become a better brick runner, or off the bike in terms of in races, or do you see that by being a better and stronger cyclist that it makes the running off the bike easier in a sense?
Yeah. So both actually work. The answer is both. So we do a lot of running off the bike with Matt, and I know a lot of coaches don't believe in it or whatever, but it's sort of one of those things. It's like, why not just do it if you can? And if it helps, then it helps. But if it's not helping, well, at least you tried. But I do think it does help. Like we'll do not long runs off the bike, but like 30 to 45 minutes after a longer ride. And it's not so much about building that fitness to be able to run 13 or 26 miles. It's more about just running off the bike and feeling the feelings of not having a peppy run form immediately. And I do know some athletes around Boulder who don't run off the bike. And just this past weekend in Chattanooga, one of them was like, "Oh, my back was so tight when I started the run." And I don't really have those problems. And I don't know if that's just specific to me. I just kind of get off the bike and I have about a minute of feeling weird, but then I'm just back into my run stride. So I do think running off the bike helps. And then you mentioned being a stronger rider. It definitely helps to be able to run. Not only from a standpoint of obviously like not having as much taken out of your legs, but also there's little lulls in the bike where before I would have just been having to struggle to stay on a pace or stay on a wattage. Instead, it's like those are the moments where I say, "Oh, I'll have a drink, or I'll eat some food here, take in some calories." And that's been a big thing, is that I'm more able to focus on my nutrition and get it exactly right. I don't think I've had a race where I've messed up my nutrition in probably a year and a half. And it's just because there's these little sections of time on the bike, whether I'm by myself or in a group, where I can say, I can take these next 30 seconds to properly fuel myself for the run. Whereas back in 2014, I was just like hanging on for dear life. And so those two things combined, it makes running off the bike a lot easier, I think.
And so I guess one more training sort of question, which is, you obviously did that transition from being a swimmer into a triathlete. For others, amateurs who are looking to get into the sport, I mean, what would be one or two pieces of advice beyond what we've already talked about, but in terms of becoming kind of a competitive triathlete, not necessarily professional, but just sort of, from an amateur rank, how did, making that transition, being kind of building and progressing and that kind of thing?
Well, I think the biggest thing you can do is to get a coach or someone who kind of knows what he or she is doing. I went my first few years at University of Florida just doing what other people were doing. I didn't have a coach. And so I would just jump in with my friend. His name was Darren, and he would be doing like a 12K track workout. And I would jump in and I would last like 10Ks. And then honestly, I wouldn't even be able to run for about 7 days until the next track workout. So in that sense, it was totally mismanaged training. And I ended up meeting a lady named Jennifer Hutchison at a development race in like Tampa, Florida. And she started coaching me. And the difference was night and day. Like the amount of things you can fit into the week when you have someone who knows what they're doing, or like the skills you can learn, or like the strength training processes that someone with knowledge can put into your training program. It is night and day. And that was when I really started to make improvements in the sport, is when I got a coach. And then, I guess you just have to kind of analyze your own weaknesses. Because if you come from a swim background, I spent my first few years of triathlon, I would swim 3 times a week, like 3K, whereas cycling and running was a huge focus, because clearly I wasn't even close to the level I needed to be at to race in the collegiate ranks or even the professional ranks. So, I mean, we eventually had to dial the swim way back up in order to race ITU. But for those first few years of development, it was a lot about just analyzing your weaknesses, figuring out what you need to do to be better at the sport, a more complete athlete. Because for me, winning swims and then getting 100th, and the race overall wasn't what I wanted to do.
Right.
So,
yeah, and I could see people falling into the trap of training their strength because it feels good rather than train their weakness.
Yeah, exactly. And also swimming's boring, so I had no problem not swimming.
Glad to hear you say it too. I don't have a swim background, but I kind of find it boring too. But at the same time, when I get out of that pool, I never feel better than that minute you've kind of finished a workout.
Oh yeah, especially those like really early morning swims, like 6 a.m. or even earlier sometimes. Like it's horrible to start, but that feeling when you're done is actually amazing. And,
oh yeah.
It might even be something I do after I retire, which I always told myself I'd never swim again, but I guess never say never.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time. So I guess one final question would be, what does the rest of 2017 look like for you? What's the plan from here on out? Obviously the season winds down soon, but what's happening now and then kind of going into 18? I mean, what's the plan?
Well, 2018, I think I'm going to do a Kona focus year. And I mean, being that 70.3 Worlds is in South Africa, I don't think I'm going to make that trip. So I'm actually doing Ironman Taiwan in about 16 days.
Oh, cool.
And so that'll be a shock to the system for sure, since I've been doing 70.3 training. Although anyone who saw my training would say I'm crazy. And of course, I have enough training volume to do an Ironman. Then I'll head to Kona, just spectating. I'll watch the race unfold. I'll hang out with my sponsors, and then a couple of races to end the season. I'll probably do Cabo 70.3 and then Cartagena 70.3 in December. I like to race all the way to December just so I can take those holiday weeks off completely, because I know they're going to be kind of disjointed no matter whether I'm trying to train or not. And then, depending on how Taiwan goes and my points ranking and the Ironman PR, I'll see what I have to do to make Kona next year. And hopefully I have like a lot of leeway. Maybe I'll be able to choose some challenge races or other types of races to go do if I've already got my qualification sewn up.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a great plan. And you do a lot of really interesting location races. You definitely go abroad and stuff, which is awesome. I mean, Taiwan's got to be a cool place to race.
Yeah. Like some people say I'm the only American who travels. Some of the Aussies say that. I mean, because there are a lot of racing opportunities outside of the United States. And I tend to do well in hot races, so you'll often find me in south of the border, down in South America or Central America. And then I've recently gotten into racing in Asia. There's just a lot of support. Like Ironman Taiwan is probably going to have 3,000 to 3,500 athletes. Like it's a huge sport in Taiwan. So, I mean, you might not think that because we never hear anything about the races in Taiwan, but it is an awesome place to race. They do a great job. And not just them, but some of the other race organizations over there, like Sunshine Events, and then some of the challenge races over there. It's just a fun place to go race if you can get there. I'm flying on miles, so keeping it cheap.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like an amazing plan, and you're definitely using your pro career to get to see the entire world, which is really cool. So, I mean, Kevin, thank you so much for your time today and sharing, stories and training tips and all that stuff. I really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast. For more information on this and other episodes, please visit www.intelligentracer.com. Also, be sure to check us out on social media, and please review us on your podcast directory. Join us next time for another edition of the Intelligent Racer.